thank you all, and thanks. Thank you to Annalisa and everybody who was involved in planning this great day, and I'm really happy to be on this panel with both Nancy and Michael, whose work I admire greatly, and we've had the pleasure of working together. I also want to recognize any dreamers that might be in the room. Are any dreamers, any undocumented students who are fighting? Great. Well, thank you for coming. I want to recognize you and all of the other dreamers around the country that have really shifted the immigrant rights movement, really have provided such a level of inspiration to all of us who've been in this fight for a long time. And I'll share a little bit about that in my presentation. Also wanted to recognize Roberto Gonzalez, an immigration lawyer from Rhode Island, who I also have the pleasure of both admiring your work and having been mentored by you in Rhode Island, where I grew up. And lastly, recognizing my parents, right? This is a civil rights issue. This is about education. And for many of us who are immigrants who came to this country, it was for a better, for better economic and educational opportunities. My parents were factory workers. They're no longer with us. But they were very clear, right? That they made the sacrifice to come to this country. I'm the youngest of 10. It's good to know that we share that in common, Michael. But my parents were very clear. They said to us, no tenemos dinero para dejarles ni ninguna riqueza, pero la educación es algo que nadie le puede quitar, right? We don't have any wealth or riches to leave for you, but education is something that nobody can ever take from you. And I took that very, very dearly, as all my brothers and sisters. And it's through that fight for an education that we at the National Immigration Law Center truly believe that education is a pathway out of poverty for us, because we work to defend and advance the rights of low-income immigrants. We believe that education, access to workers' rights, access to health care, and access to benefits, right? Safety net systems that today in Alabama, even access to water is being denied. And so the level of repression that many of our community members are living in today, the level of fear that people are living in today, dreamers have shifted that, right? Dreamers have said, we are undocumented and unafraid. And we'll hopefully get a chance to talk a little bit about that later, but that has been such a beautiful shift. Rather than talking about immigrants and undocumented immigrants as victims, who actually survive every single day, who've taken some of the greatest risks to come to this country, and who survive and fight for survival every day, whether it's in the workplace, whether when they're going to a supermarket, whether they're going to take their child to an emergency room, or again, in Alabama today, where children and their parents have to worry about whether a teacher is going to question them about their status. So today I'll provide some background on the DREAM Act, and also a little bit about the administrative advocacy that is going on to try to prevent the deportations of so many dreamers, as well as workers and other immigrant members of our community. As folks might know, the DREAM Act was first introduced back in 2001 by Senator Durbin from Illinois, who has been just really the staunch supporter of dreamers around the country, as well as Senator Hatch from Utah, a Republican, who had, as Nancy said, this is a bill that has had such great bipartisan support over the years, but that unfortunately has gotten caught up in this toxic web that is Washington, D.C., where even the most Republican supporters of the DREAM Act have taken their votes back, and that's what we saw last December. But in 2007, and just to kind of provide a little bit of the trajectory of the DREAM Act, in 2007, we came really close. It actually passed in the Senate, or almost passed in the Senate with the filibuster. It ultimately was blocked, but 2007 really provided this pivotal moment. We at the National Immigration Law Center had been working on the bill. We helped draft the bill. Year after year, we fought with it, along with many allies and dreamers. When we lost that vote in 2007, we had a loose coalition, a network of folks who supported the DREAM Act, and that was made up of dreamers, it was made up of mostly national advocates. It was a very DC coalition, and I will admit that, right, that we as advocates really were looking at this as a policy issue. In 2007, when we lost that vote, the dreamers said, actually, what you immigrant rights advocates have been doing isn't working. Let us be the protagonists. This bill, this law affects us directly. We want to be at the table. And it was a really beautiful shift, because we then became the fiscal sponsor for what is now called the United We Dream Network, And we're able to have them be at the table and have them shape what the DREAM Act campaign would look like. And fast forward to, between 2008, 2009, and 2010, the Dreamers have shifted what advocacy looks like, what federal legislative advocacy looks like. And rather than just us representing their interests, we sat side by side at the table, whether it was at policymakers' offices, whether it was meeting with the White House, meeting with the Department of Homeland Security, really having them shape what that campaign looks like. And it's that energy that they brought to the DREAM Act campaign that really allowed us to almost win in December of last year. As folks probably know, we won in the House of Representatives. It was a great victory since we hadn't won before in the House. And in the Senate, we lost by 5 votes. And I remember very clearly, that it was on December 18th, we were at the Senate gallery, and it was also the day that both the DREAM Act and Don't Ask, Don't Tell was being voted on. And it was the most beautiful, I just had this snapshot of looking around. It was the most diverse set of people looking down at the Senate floor, hoping and counting every single vote. Mostly people of color, young people, LGBTQ and undocumented immigrants, and those of us who are allies. And then the Senate floor was predominantly white older men who were the ones who were making the decision. And it's just important because that snapshot represents the demographic shift, right? It represents the changes that are happening in our country, which are very much rooted in this fear, the politics of fear and hate that is allowing for statutes like Alabama to pass, because they are afraid that these young immigrant people, that people of color, that immigrants will become citizens and change the politics of this nation. So it's important to kind of make sure that we're grounded in the fact that a lot of the anti-immigrant sentiment right now, and even the folks who are afraid of voting for the DREAM Act right now, it's about the fear of what this country is becoming. And I think the DREAM Act, as well as the tuition equity bills at the state level, actually present an alternative to say, no, let's invest in everybody. Let's invest in education so that everybody who wants to contribute their full potential has the ability to do so. Let's look at most of the tuition equity laws or bills that are being introduced actually benefit both undocumented immigrants and US citizens, right? So it's looking for an alternative vision that our country should have to ensure that we are building a nation of educated individuals, a nation that's prosperous for everybody, where there's equal opportunity for everybody. So when we lost the vote in December, and leaving the Senate chambers frankly felt like a funeral. I mean, we were all slowly walking out, everybody was crying, and there was some moments of depression after that many Dreamers actually felt out of despair. But again, the hope of these young people turned what could have been a defeat to actually feeling like, you know what, we came really close. We lost only by 5 votes. We're going to do this again. And we're now going to push for administrative relief if it doesn't look like we can get a legislative pass. As we know from the midterm elections last year, this congressional session started with a very anti-immigrant sentiment. The House of Representatives is controlled by, again, a small minority, but a very vocal anti-immigrant set of policymakers, especially in the House Judiciary Committee, which is led by Lamar Smith. And one of the things that we saw was there is a need to continue introducing the DREAM Act. It was reintroduced in May of this year. But again, at this time, we know that we are very unlikely to actually get the passage of the DREAM Act or any other type of immigration reform. So instead, the shift has been for administrative advocacy. And in April, shortly before the DREAM Act was introduced, Senator Durbin and a number of other senators sent a letter to the Department of Homeland Security basically saying, look, you have the authority to exercise administrative discretion. You have the authority to make administrative changes without the legislation. At this moment, we are asking you that at the very least, you not deport these Dreamers. And Dreamers, as well as many other immigrant workers, organizations fighting for the rights of all immigrants, we have been pressuring the administration on that as well to say, look, you can't put the onus simply on Congress. You have certain authority to make administrative changes. And what we are asking right now, given the high level of deportations, I mean, the Obama administration, despite what the anti-Obama factors might say, have actually had the greatest level of immigration enforcement that we've seen from any other administration. The Obama administration has reached and surpassed the 1 million mark of how many people have been deported under his administration. And so with this level of high immigration enforcement And the fact that dreamers, immigrant workers, day laborers, people who are complaining about domestic violence are actually still being detained and deported is just unacceptable, especially under this administration. We fortunately were able to get, in August, both in April and then in August, there was a follow-up memo from the Department of Homeland Security basically saying, we will exercise prosecutorial discretion. Finally, they heard the demands, and it was a victory. We have to count that as a victory because it's clearly as a result of the organizing that was happening. Not surprisingly, the August memo, the announcement was made the same week where the National Day Labor Organizing Network and many other organizers around the country had been pushing back on the administration with respect to secure communities. And in that space of feeling politically attacked, the administration finally said, okay, we will provide some administrative relief. What they said basically was that they were going to look at 300,000 people who are currently in detention and look at who has the equities, who should be considered a low-level priority for deportation proceedings. Like every law enforcement agency in the country, every single day, law enforcement agents make decisions about what are the priorities, what resources do they have, where will they focus those resources. And the administration is now saying there are some low-level priorities and there are higher-level priorities. Among the low-level priorities are dreamers. There are also people who are the primary caretaker, have really shifted the immigrant rights movement, really have provided such a level of inspiration to all of us who've been in this fight for a long time. And I'll share a little bit about that in my presentation. Also wanted to recognize Roberto Gonzalez, an immigration lawyer from Rhode Island, who I also have the pleasure of. Well, thank you all, and thanks. Thank you to Annalisa and everybody who was involved in planning this great day, and I'm really happy to be on this panel with both Nancy and Michael, whose work I admire greatly, and we've had the pleasure of working together. I also want to recognize any dreams and opportunities. My parents were factory workers, they're no longer with us, but they were very clear, right? They made the sacrifice to come to this country. I'm the youngest of 10, it's good to know that we share that in common, Michael, but my parents were very clear. They said to us, no tenemos dinero para dejarle. Both admiring your work and having been mentored by you in Rhode Island, where I grew up. And lastly, recognizing my parents, right? This is a civil rights issue. This is about education. And for many of us who are immigrants who came to this country, it was for a better, for better economic and dreamers that might be in the room. Are any dreamers, any undocumented students who are fighting? Great. Well, thank you for coming. And I especially want to recognize you and all of the other dreamers around the country that